Good evening. Tonight we're speaking about Lag BaOmer. Welcome back to our show. Lag BaOmer this year is going to be this coming Thursday night, May 9th and May 10th during the day. Some will celebrate it only during the day on Lag BaOmer during Friday, but there's various customs, and we'll go through the different details about this special day. First of all, let's try to analyze what the name is. Lag BaOmer. In Hebrew, Aleph is 1, A is 1, B is Beis is 2. Excuse me. 30 would be till 10, Yud is 10. Then Kaf is 20, Lamed is 30. When you want to say something is 33, you say Lamed and Gimel. 30 and 3. So now the 33rd of the day when we count what is called the Omer. The Omer is the day after Passover. They brought a sacrifice in the temple from the wheat, from barley actually, and they brought it into the temple from the new crops, and from then on you could eat from the crops that were produced from that year. So you could they brought a sacrifice. So it was a whole celebration how they brought this Omer, the mincha, it's called, a sacrifice made out of barley, and then they counted 49 days, and on the 50th day was a new holiday called Shavuot. Today, nowadays, we don't bring the Omer physically, but in the spiritual sense it's still brought, and we do still count the Omer, and counting, every day we count. Today is the first day from the Omer, the second day from the Omer, until you reach the 50th day. On the 50th day you don't count, but it comes automatically, comes the holiday of Shavuot. It happens to be that day of Shavuot is when God gave the Torah, and therefore it's also called Matan Torah. Our rabbis connect the two and say that although after Egypt they were counting the days, when will they receive the Torah, and finally on the 50th day is when Shavuot came around. So therefore, in the later years, when God, right afterwards, but later on when they brought the sacrifice from the fields, so they made this holiday Shavuot, and it's connected with the same time. So Shavuot in itself is a holiday. In the Torah, it doesn't mention anything about the giving of the Torah, but we in our prayers and in the celebrations, we connect everything with the giving of the Torah, which we'll talk about it another time when it gets closer. We're up to now almost the 33rd day. So 33rd. Now, so what happens? Later on in the years, we're talking about in the time of the temple, the time of the destruction of the temple, about 2,000 years ago, there was a great scholar. His name was Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva was at first he was a very simple shepherd. He was a Am Ha'aretz, it's called. Am Ha'aretz is a simpleton, a person of the land, not a scholar, the opposite of a scholar. In fact, not only not a scholar, but they used to hate the scholars, and the scholars didn't get along with them, and they wouldn't rely on them because they're Am Ha'aretz. They don't know what the law is. In certain cases, certain foods you couldn't eat from them, especially when it came to the tithing of items that are supposed to be tithed and given to the priest in Israel. They couldn't eat from their foods because you wouldn't know if they knew the law, or if you could trust them. At any rate, there was a big division between the Am Ha'aretz and the scholars. The scholars were very, very brilliant scholars. We're talking about people that are so spiritual and so godly that they were able to affect things with just asking, speaking to God. There was even a rabbi that split a river without the big noises that happened by Moses. Things like that. It was almost simple things that they did without big noises. This is recorded in the Talmud, various places. So we're talking about great scholars, and then there's these simple people who don't know how to read or don't know how to write, which is also uncommon today. Even the most simple people in the Jewish culture know how to read. They know at least how to pray and certain things if they're interested. So it's an interesting phenomenon that took place in those days. The highest and the lowest. So this person, Rabbi Akiva, when he was he fell in love with a daughter of a very rich person. He was a shepherd, and he fell in love with a very rich person's daughter, and he married her against the will of her father. Her father disowned him because he was a very simple person. So they lived a very poor life. Her name was Rachel, and his name was Akiva. And at a certain point, she was encouraging him that, it's time maybe to start thinking about learning Torah. And he once was sitting as a shepherd, he was sitting next to where there was water running, and he saw a stone being pounded on by little drips of water. And over the years, because there were those drips of water, it hit the rock, and it made a hole in the rock. So he figured out that if you're talking about a very hard thing like stone, and even a very soft thing like water, but if it keeps on pounding, it's going to hit and make and penetrate. So the same thing is my mind, even though it's maybe like a rock, but eventually the Torah could hit through. So he spoke about it to his wife, and she said to go ahead and learn Torah. So he left her to learn Torah far away, and he went to the school. He went, and he was not ashamed. He was not embarrassed. He went and learned with the little kids in school, learning from the alphabet, till he got, and surprisingly enough, he was able to learn. And not only he was able to learn, but he got more and more and more into becoming a scholar. And over 12 years, he not only became a scholar, but he was teaching already, and he had 12,000 students that he taught Torah, Talmud. And what our rabbis say about Rabbi Akiva is marvelous things, phenomenal things about his teachings, that everything goes according to him, he's always on target with the law. There's many arguments in the Talmud, and yet the law will go according to what he says. He figured out every time the Torah says the word the. In the beginning it says, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. And usually the is not even a modern word today. We don't use the word the as much, only when it's needed, et. So Rabbi Akiva figured out why every et is there. It's to add something, to add another thing. And till he came to a point where there was one particular verse that says, you should fear God. It says, Et Hashem Elokecha Tira, you should fear God. So then he said, what else is there to add to fearing God? And he said, oh no, if that's not proper, then maybe my whole thoughts are wrong, and maybe I should go back on everything that I said, the et, and to say no, that the et in the Torah is not to teach us anything more, but it's just there. Until he figured out, no, that et, you should fear and connect to God, refers to scholars, to the scholars of Torah, the teachers of Torah, that if you connect yourself with scholars and teachers of Torah, Talmidei Chacham, scholars and people who are connected to God, if you connect yourself with them, you are connected with God. You connect yourself to God. Different than other religions where the connector divides between the people. People pray to the scholars. In Judaism, there is a connector. Moses was connecting the Jews to God. We always had scholars and teachers, and we are waiting for Mashiach to come. So there is a person, but that person isn't the person that we pray to, but he connects us, and with his merits he connects us, with his advice he helps us, and there's many, many things that a tzaddik, a righteous person, does, a righteous person, a scholar, Torah scholar, that would that otherwise we would need a lot of help. And this, he's like a shepherd. So it comes to the Rabbi Akiva. He found that out, and so this is just to show a little bit of his scholarship, of his. Anyways, this Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 students, and he came back to home after 12 years, and he overhears, the Talmud relates the story and says that this neighbor came by and said to Rabbi Akiva, your husband is, he was a wicked person. He says, your husband is, what's going on with him? He left you, what's the story? So she said to him, as long as I know that he's studying Torah, I wouldn't mind if he would leave for another 12 years. So when Rabbi Akiva heard that, he knew the best thing would be to not even enter his house, but he made an about face, and he went back to study for another 12 years. And then he had already 24,000 students. When he had those 24,000 students, he came back with them, and his wife heard that he's coming, so she came out to greet him. And you talk about scholars are all men, and they see this woman coming, so they asked him, they were going to say, what's this woman doing here? So he said, no, let her come, this is my wife. He didn't say, he said, it's because of her that I have and you have what I have. That it's because of her that he's able to learn. So here we see another fabulous thing, what Judaism looks at women, Jewish women, is that when they stay home and care for the house, and they send their husbands, they have the whole merit of the teaching of and sometimes, and in many cases, the teacher, the person, not only the person's teaching, but what he teaches others, and so on. Anyways, Rabbi Akiva had this 24,000 students. So this is a part of the celebration of in general, of Rabbi Akiva's times. But during this time, unfortunately, later on in years, Rabbi Akiva's students all died in a big plague. And they attributed it to that they didn't honor each other properly. So when you say they didn't honor each other properly, and they all died except 5 students, and one of them was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. So we must understand that we're not talking about that they hated each other, they fought with each other, but somehow, according to their level, the way they were, to their level, this was a wrong attitude, and they didn't give place for each other to sort of express themselves, and therefore they were punished. So it's a sad time in the Jewish calendar, and so for the first 33 days of it's known that it's 33 days. It's not exactly known which 33 days. There's an argument, and there's various customs when to count those 33 days, whether it is the first 33 days or the 33 days from the beginning of the month of Iyar into the next month of Sivan, which is 3 days close to Shavuot. At any rate, on the 33rd itself, everyone says that there wasn't. It was less. It wasn't. Even those who say that it's sort of in the middle of it, yet they say that we don't have to mourn on that day. But otherwise, it's a time of mourning. It's a period of mourning in between Passover and Shavuot, Passover, which we just celebrated, Shavuot, which were coming up. In those in between, we don't do many things, like we don't do weddings, we don't take haircuts. Live music we don't listen to, and we don't say Shechianu. We don't, when we have something new, we keep it for afterwards, and then we make the Shechianu that God renewed us, because it is not the time for renewal or happiness. It's a sad time. Imagine weddings. We're talking about weddings. This is not. We don't make weddings in these days, except on Lag BaOmer, on the 33rd. So let's now go to the story of Lag BaOmer. Why on the 33rd is different. So one reason is, like I said, that some say it stopped. Besides that, later on, and not during the plague, there was a student of Rabbi Akiva. His name was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Rabbi Shimon, the son of Yochai, was a big mystic, and he led a life, a very spiritual life, and because he passed away on that day, he asked before that the day that he passes should be a very happy day. It should be a day of which is called Hilula, a wedding, and in fact, there's a story that there was this scholar that was mourning the destruction of the temple, and he was always, he couldn't, it bothered him always, the destruction of the temple every single day of the calendar year. I'm talking about Passover and Shavuot and all the different holidays, Sukkot and everything. You know, he used to just say Nachim, what we say on Tisha B'Av, on the 9th of Av, which we mourn the destruction of the temple. He would say it every day, not Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, a person later, in later generations. And they came to him from heaven and they told him that this is, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's soul came to him and said, "You're ruining my happy day. My day is not a day to say Nachem, it's not a day to mourn the destruction of the temple, because it's a very happy day. It's a day of celebration." Why is it a day of celebration? Because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was one of the perfect people in the world, and when he passed away, so the total sum of what he has done throughout the years in his life it sums up. It's a day of conclusion, a day that it awakens in heaven newly what he did. And therefore, this day is such a happy day. And in fact, over here I have here there's all about. Someone wrote a whole thing, different stories, different things that take place on Lag BaOmer. Well, let's again go back to who he was. This is one of the books that is it's one of the 3 volumes of the Zohar, the Holy Zohar, which now it's translated. It's a very, very spiritual book, all about one of the first mystical books of Judaism that speaks about mysticism, speaks about the spiritual dimension of Torah. It's Kabbalah. And he was the first one who said, time now to reveal the teachings of Kabbalah. And it's called the Zohar, and it was hidden for a while. And then some say, there's the seculars that will argue and say that it's not by him, and so on and so forth. But traditionally, we believe, and we have the Rabbi the Arizal and the different mystics that say actually that this was from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and that he wrote this book and many other things that were later on. That came later on from this, but this is sort of a base of Kabbalah and has many teachings. Some is understood, some is not. This is very interesting ideas. In the Talmud, it relates the story of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. The story was that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was among a group that they spoke about the Romans. At that time, the Romans were persecuting. Right at that moment, they weren't persecuting; it was already time of the exile, and they put the Jewish people into exile, the Second Temple, after the Second Temple. So at that time, they were talking about the Romans and the Roman Empire. So one rabbi said, well, they did such beautiful things. Another rabbi said, well, they did it all for themselves. And another rabbi didn't say anything. So they overheard it. They heard about it, the Romans, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said that they're wicked, and everything that they did was for themselves. They made highways to be able to collect taxes. He said some things that when they heard, they were pursuing him, looking for him. So he ran away. At first he was hiding in a synagogue, but then he realized that they're going to find him. So he and his son, Rabbi Elazar, went and hid in a cave. Again, this is not in the Zohar, this is a story in the Talmud. He went and hid in the cave, and a miracle happened that a carob tree grew there, and there was a spring of water. And basically he lived in the cave for 12 years. He had only one pair of clothing because he ran quickly, so they would basically undress themselves and cover themselves with sand in the cave and study a whole time. And when it came to daven, to pray, they would get dressed. And they were studying for 12 years. After the 12 years, they heard that the Romans are not. I think the Caesar changed, so the law changes, and they came out of the cave, and wherever his son Elazar whenever he looked at things, he was critical. He said, "Why are people working? They should be studying Torah." And he looked at places and things burned by him looking with anger. The place he broke down the situation, and so Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai healed it by looking back and healing it. So he said, "No, this is not what we want to do." They went back for another year into the cave, and they were hiding for another year. And over there, and he taught him basically the basics of life, that the world has to exist the way they are. Not everyone is as spiritual as we are, and then they came out of the cave. It says that there was a student that came and at first before they went into the cave, whatever he told him, Pinchas ben Yair would have 24 questions. And when he came out of the cave, because of the merit of the suffering in the cave, his teachings were that when Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair would ask him a question, he would have 24 answers on his question. So he was very, very spiritual, and he wrote the Zohar, and he writes things that sound very maybe not sound arrogant, but if you look closely on the type of person he was a big scholar, and so these great things that he writes about himself is not nearly as what he is. Besides that, he was we are taught that he was such a spiritual person, so connected with God, that he was nullified to God, that any virtue that he said about himself was because he saw the truth, and he didn't mean it as that. So he said that if the world needs a merit, it could rely on, if it needs two people, it could be my son and me. If it needs one person, it could be me. That he has a lot, in other words, he has a lot of merits because of his teachings and learning and all his good things that he did. In his days, there was no there was no rainbow, because he was so righteous that a rainbow in general, like as you see in Genesis in the story of Noah, a rainbow appears when when the world needs to be punished, but God looks at the rainbow and it reminds him not to punish. But when Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai lived, there was no need for punishment because the world was in a meritorious situation. So, therefore, it is customary to go out. In Israel, they have big celebrations in Miron. It's next to Tzfat, in the hill country of Israel, up on top of Israel, next to Safed, where the mystics actually lived. There's a mountain called Miron. They celebrate. People come like a week before and they camp out there. But generally, most of the people who come to celebrate for the night and for the day. Some people spend the Shabbos afterwards. Like this year, it's going to be it's going to be Friday, so some people will stay there for the Sabbath. But it's celebrated on that day. Also, people since these days we don't take haircuts, so since it's customary on the third year of a child to make a special haircut called upshernish or chalaka, it's called in Hebrew. So a lot of people bring their children to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's holy place, resting place, and they pray there. And there's many miracles that happen, and they cut the hair. Otherwise, outside of Israel, the schools and people who are able to bring children, they go on outings on this day. They go out, they take them out of the school, the yeshivas and cheders. They go out and celebrate. There's many parades that they take kids to celebrate Judaism and to celebrate happiness and joy in being students of Torah. Like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai wanted that all children should learn Torah, not only learn Torah, but he wanted them to learn mysticism, that they should learn mysticism. And he said that with his book, the Zohar, the Jews will go out of exile. The Jewish people will go out of exile. The Jewish people and the Shekhinah, the divine presence. So there's therefore it.
What's happening in Chabad this year?
It is customary to go out and celebrate. We're going to take our children out to the park and celebrate. There's many locally. Just tune into our webpage and call us, and we'll tell you what we're going to be doing this Lag BaOmer. I'm talking about the May 9th and 10th, if I'm not mistaken. Let me just double check real quick. But I think it is the 9th over the 10th. At any rate, come by. No, I'm sorry. It is the 10th and the 11th. The 10th at night and the 11th of May. It's this Thursday night and Friday that we're celebrating Lag BaOmer. 2001. In 2001, it's May 10th and 11th. Have a happy Lag BaOmer.